So let me start off. Before I ask my questions, let me just ask you all for a quick question. We all have different perceptions in the world. We all have different beliefs. Some people are fierce Democrats, some are fierce Republicans. Everyone has their own belief. To me, based on what I believe, what I read, I see climate change as I saw it as an urgent problem 10 years ago. I consider it as more serious than anything. I consider it terrifying, and I consider it something that there's nothing more important to discuss or to solve. However, that's me, that's my life, that's my perception. There's a lot of people that say to me they don't like they don't believe in climate change. They think it's they don't, they have issues with government on certain issues that might be justified, but they think that because of that, the whole climate thing is a hoax. It's a democratic hoax. And for whatever everyone's reasons are, everyone has a right to figure out whatever they want to figure out. But in the end of the day, there are certain basic things that we want to be clear on. So for the people that are saying, I don't believe climate change, I don't believe this science, I don't believe it's real, can you talk to them for a minute, and then we'll get on to the questions. And if you want to throw in to climate change, you could add and biodiversity loss and ocean acidification and water shortages and everything else related to it. So maybe just speak to our audience for a moment, each of you.
Perhaps I can kick this off by saying I live in Australia, and I think most Australians now, in fact, more than 3/4 of Australians are convinced that climate change is real and that it is affecting us and that we've contributed to it. And the reason for that is because we've experienced it. In Australia, particularly, the droughts have been so severe, the flooding has been so severe, the fires have been so severe, the barrier reef is now on its last legs. And I think that happens when we personally experience the effects of climate change. That's when we start to think, oh, well, things are happening. The water cycles are changing. The amount of water vapor in the atmosphere is more than before. We're getting floods, we're getting rains, we're getting droughts, etc. So I think that's the answer. When people experience it for themselves, then they believe.
I would note that the first experiment that was done to demonstrate that carbon dioxide warms the atmosphere was in 1856. So it's established science for a long time, and we could measure how much carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere. So it becomes pretty hard to make the case when you see how global surface temperatures have risen to record levels in recent years. And when you see the ice shelves melting, and when you see the violent storms that we have now, and when you know that basic science that was established in 1856, to argue that it isn't happening.
Yeah, I mean, I calculate for a living, right? So I would say to me, the most persuasive nail in the coffin of the sentiments that you sort of made yourself a mouthpiece for just temporarily just now is a set of calculation that is repeated every time the IPCC issues another report, and that is a comparison of global mean temperature calculated in the ensemble members, in other words, the number of different computer models and the number of times each of those is run, it keeps rising. But they do two things. One is that they simulate the climate evolution, let's say in the last 200 years, with every known impact, for example, volcanoes and natural cycles of carbon uptake on land and so forth, in the 11-year solar cycle, all of the external forces on the climate system save one, and that is our emissions, okay? And then an identical set with the same models, the same boundary conditions, the same everything, different in only one way, the inclusion of our emissions. And wouldn't you know it, that the one that knows everything about the climate system except us is more or less flat. It completely misses all the trends that were just invoked, all the different warming, all the melting of icebergs and so forth. Okay, the other one that is cognizant of both the natural forcing and our emissions more or less perfectly tracks observed reality. If you have two competing systems of trying to explain reality, one manifestly fails, and the other one, with a little bit of slop, perfectly dead on. Adhering to the first of those is theology. That's not fact. I can't argue with theology, but it is not something that productively guides behavior.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if we have a number of issues, climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, desertification, ocean acidification, rising temperatures, species extinction, what in the world does this have to do with if I eat a cheeseburger? What does it have to do if I eat fish, if I eat eggs? If I go to a diner and someone has chicken, someone has fish, someone has steak, someone has yogurt, a lot of people don't understand how this is affecting all these other things. Can you give us a very basic, simple lesson so that we all are clear how the cheeseburger, the chicken, the fish, the steak, the dairy, the eggs is somehow affecting all these systems and the climate?
Yeah. Can I ask, when you pose a question, maybe you tell us which order you want us to respond.
Why don't you go first, Gidon, and then Glenn, and then Gerard?
Sure. So it's very simple. Producing different food items requires very different resources and different amount of rangeland, different amount of cropland, different amount of fertilizer, reactive nitrogen, different amount of water, and it produces different amount of emissions. And since the problems that we just enumerated all have to do with using resources beyond what is really available to us by the workings of Earth, if you choose a food item that is very resource intensive, and nothing is even close in resource intensity to beef, then you exert a much heavier burden on the planet. When you, on the other hand, consume, let's say, the same number of grams of protein, but from lentils or chickpeas, you basically exert 1 to 2 orders of magnitude less impact on all of those things.
Thank you.
Steve, your question involved what if you have a cheeseburger or what if you have some fish? And all these things have their direct costs in terms of warming the climate. So I have in my book, Food is Climate, a list of all the various ways in which they contribute greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So you have, with grazing, you have fires set to clear forests for grazing. You have pasture maintenance fires, which are set usually every year. You have foregone sequestration from lost forest and vegetation, known as carbon opportunity cost. You have foregone sequestration from deadened oceans. You have soil destruction from lost vegetation. You have animal respiration. You have ruminant belching of methane, known as enteric fermentation. You have methane and nitrous oxide generated from animal waste. You have nitrous oxide released by nitrogen fertilizers used to grow feed for animals. You have all greenhouse gases derived from energy inputs to grow and transport feed for animals. You have all greenhouse gases derived from energy inputs to have industrial fishing. And you have the greater refrigeration and cooking generally required for animal as opposed to plant food. So you have all these different causes. And in general, when they do accounting, when the IPCC does accounting, they're not counting many of these when they're comparing direct emissions from fossil fuels to agricultural emissions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Look, I've just finished reading a book by George Monbiot. He's a British science writer, and he says that if aliens were to visit our planet, they would think that the dominant life species on Earth was sheep. That's in the UK. Anywhere else on the planet, it would be cattle. So why is that? It's purely because we've devoted so much of our planet to these animals, these ruminants, the ones that eat grass. Let's just talk about them for a minute. So if you look at the biomass on Earth, the mammals, from mice up to whales, the wild animals that are left on Earth, the wild mammals, make up just 4% of the mammal biomass weight on Earth. 30% is humans, okay? So we've overrun the planet. But 60% is grazed animals, mostly, and pigs. But they consume not 60% of the resources. They consume way more than that because all of them are young. They're babies, basically. You get a pig, for example, it's grown from nothing to 100 kilos in 5 or 6 months. And because of that, they're bred to be so ravenously hungry that they continually eat. They're just eating monsters, and they put 5 times as much and they eat 5 times as much as we do. So this 60% of these, call them livestock, consume much more than 60% of the world's resources. So the sums are right now, if everyone continues to eat the same way we do now, this planet, our planet, can sustainably support half our population. So eating the way we have, devoting 37% of the planet to grazing and another 6% or so to animal agriculture, crops, 40-something% of the planet is devoted to animals, from which we get about 15% of our food by dry weight. Now, how wasteful is that? That's why George Monbiot says the most wasteful and destructive thing we do to our planet is raise grass-fed animals. To do that, we have killed off our forests. That's the biggest impact on the forest, is grazing. We've so changed our water cycles, our temperatures. We don't realise that we've overstepped many planetary boundaries, but the biggest reason for all of those planetary boundaries, except arguably climate, and I would argue otherwise, we've overstepped them because of the food we eat, not because of our iPhones, not because of the mines. If you look at the mines and the cities and all the built-up areas together, they make up 1% of the land. We've devoted more than 40% of the land to raise animals, for which we get 15% of our food. So how wasteful is that? I mean, we will get to a point where we've so overspent on our credit card that the bank will shut us down. And that's what the planet will do very soon. We're seeing the kickback right now. So we cannot keep consuming the same way we do and expect that there'll be a home for our children and their children. We've just so trashed our planet, mostly because of what we eat. Now, if we were to reverse that, if we were to eat plant-based globally, we could return 40% of the planet to nature. We could make that 4% of mammals that are wild species from mice up to elephants. We could return them 40% of the planet for their habitat. This would solve the extinction crisis. It would solve the climate crisis when all that forests were to regrow. It would solve the water cycles. It would solve the biodiversity loss. It would solve a lot of nitrogen pollution. So many factors can be controlled simply because of what we have power. We have enormous power. And it's so most of us think, oh, that's a big change. But already 85% of our nutrients come from plants. And it's just the last 15%. It's not a big thing. So, we can do it, and it would be transformative to our planet. That's all.
Thank you. So if we switch to a plant-based diet, sometimes I read articles that say almonds use a lot of water. So are we sure that a whole food plant-based diet is definitely going to be less resource intensive, or is it still have problems of its own?
We're sure that
Can
it will be
I
less
share my
resource.
screen for a second, Steve?
Please. Yes, please.
Okay. Do you see this the bottom figure that says beef?
Yes.
Good. This is a calculation that we published a few years ago in PNAS that asked the question that essentially quantifies what Jerry was just saying. And imagine here is all the different feed all the different types of feed we now feed to beef. And this is measured in protein. So the thickness of this arrow is proportional to how much protein is in the feed in the US beef production system. This arrow, limp arrow downward, that's the loss. How much of all the protein we feed is actually lost? This is what is actually productively made available to us. That is the partitioning is 97% is lost, 3% is retained. Look at this. This is just the conventional food loss. You put a steak on your plate and a little bit is left. Okay, so overall we get 2% of the protein in the feed that we feed the beef industry becomes edible beef. Now, suppose we took only the fine cropland, forget about rangeland, that is entirely rewilded, okay? But and it's of course, a huge societal benefit. But let's not take credit for that. Let's just focus on the fine cropland that we use for producing that feed. Instead, we will now use it to grow, broccoli or zucchini or whatever. And how much more protein are we going to get? And this is a diverse plant-based diet. The answer is 96% more protein for human consumption, half again as much. If you go to the most efficient of all animals and animal food production pathways, and that is eggs, egg-laying hens, if you reallocate the resources we now allocate to them to producing a diverse plant-based diet, we will have 40% more human edible protein. This is why the idea that anybody will doubt the notion that eating plants is vastly more efficient than eating animals is I cannot offer a more compelling, unimpeachable argument than this. And if you still adhere to the notion that somehow you must eat animals or that they're efficient, you are impervious to logic and empirical fact.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at your chart. It says beef, pork, dairy, poultry, and eggs. So why don't we just eat fish from the oceans and the fish farms? If these are not good, why don't we just switch over to fish and fish farms?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And fishes, I should say, span a huge range. Something like shark or sword, they're actually even more resource intensive than beef. It's unbelievable because there's so few of them to catch, and you need to travel so far to catch them. On the other hand, things like anchovies or sardines or herring, fish types that are associated with coastal upwelling, those are actually fairly good. And your point is quite defensible, I would say. There is a compelling argument that aquatic foods can be a viable source. I mean, we wrote a paper in Nature a few years back about blue foods, and some systems like carp are very efficient and are really competitive with plant alternatives. Other things, not at all, and some of them are just ostentatiously wasteful, like I mentioned, shark or sword. So eating sardines or herring, I would say, if you need to have some animal between your teeth, that would be a pretty good way to go.
Well, we're currently, I believe the statistic is that we're currently getting about 3% of our food calories from fish, and we're raping the oceans all over the world to get that 3% of our food calories. And we're also, of course, feeding tons of fish to cattle, which are, I believe, now the world's greatest ocean predator. So, when you consider the damage we're doing by the bottom trawling of the ocean, all the bycatch that we get and waste, and I was very surprised and shocked, really, in the movie Seaspiracy to see that when they catch in their bycatch dolphins, when they're trying to catch tuna, they catch dolphins, and what they do is they slit the throat of the dolphins and throw them back in the water. And that is because the dolphins are competing with them for the tuna. So it's a pretty depraved industry. And I'll take Dr. Eshel's point that some fish may be more sustainable than others, but in general, fishing is not sustainable, and we are destroying fisheries all over the planet to get just a few % of our calories.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. We don't have a disagreement. I'm just saying that there are some people who just are unable to envision their lives without animal eating. I'm just essentially splitting the difference with such people. But I strongly agree with this sentiment.
So forgetting about not forgetting, but let's move on for a second from the carbon, the extra carbon from eating animal products. When it comes to water or freshwater use, land, forest, soil, biodiversity, species, a lot of us are thinking it seems like there's a lot of water and land, a lot of forest and soil, a lot of biodiversities, lots of species. What are you making such a big deal? I mean, is this really a concern? It seems like when I look in the road, I just see a lot of this stuff. So why are you so concerned about any of these things? Isn't there enough?
Perhaps I can start that. Yeah, the answer is that we have overstepped 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries on this Earth, the systems that support life on Earth. And what is the result of that? in many cases, it's ecological collapse. It's a change of state, tipping points, if you like. And we're facing one right now in the Amazon. It's been predicted for a long time that if so much of the Amazon is cleared, then the rainforest will stop producing the rain that makes it a rainforest. They call it a river in the sky that travels in the opposite direction to the river on the land. But that river in the sky it waters the rainforest, and it turns south, and it produces incredible productive agriculture for Brazil and other countries. And they get rain-fed. They can get 2 and sometimes 3 crops a year from that. So it's been incredibly productive for them. But now that in the last decade, that is faltering. And they put it to the amount of clearing of the rainforest in the Amazon. So this is, in real time, we're seeing ecological collapse. They're predicting that most of the Amazon will revert to savanna because the rain will falter and stop. And that's not just the Amazon, it's going to be globally. So we humans have pushed our planet to states that they haven't been for a long time. And we know that. I mean, in here in Australia, we've been having the extremes like you wouldn't believe. But a couple of years ago, near me, we had some very big floods, and a little town called Lismore was pretty much wiped out. And the MP for Lismore, wonderful woman, she was interviewed on TV, and she said, you know, if these are 1 in 100 year flood events, I must be 500 years old. In other words, the old measures that we used for our climate, for the world that supports life as we know it, is no longer valid. The world is changing. We need to, well, we're being forced to see that it's changing. And I think we're also being forced to figure out why that change is happening. And we've had thousands of scientists. I mean, I come from a science background, and I know how scientists can be influenced by funding sources, but none of those scientists is making huge money out of climate science or their work. And they all do it devotedly for a better world, even if they're a little bit influenced. So that's the best facts we have. The best information we have is what the science tells us. Science is always arguable because nothing is fixed. Everything is debatable. That's good science. So if we can't follow good science, what have we got? Are we still living in the cave, thinking about the moon fairies and so on? Maybe that's real. I'm not poo-pooing that, but what I'm saying is that the best way we have to get out of this mess that we were in is the science. And if we don't, and we'll be forced to follow that because how it will impact our lives. I've still got people down the road who are living in a temporary accommodation because their homes were flooded, wiped out. So that's how it's going to impact us.
Thank you. So the next question I would love not to ask. I hope you don't answer it because I don't want to hear the answer, and I would do anything to avoid asking this. But I guess the question is, assume we don't change, what's going to happen in the next 20 years? And if you don't want to use 20 years, you can give me a different number of years. And, let's talk about the United States, because that's where a lot of people who watch this conference are from. So assume that people, whatever, they don't want to make changes for whatever their reason, we keep doing what we're doing. What would happen in 20 years? And if you don't want to use 20, you could use 15 or 30, or you could pick the number of years. What would we expect to see? How would it change our lives?
Dr. Eshel, you want to respond to this first?
Sure. I mean, it's if you look specifically at specific changes at specific areas, models do diverge, and individual ensemble members of an individual model also diverge. So it's not really something that we can say with this kind of resolution. It's clear that the warming is happening and actually accelerating. That much is clear. It is quite clear that in the US, um, precipitation changes can be summarized crudely as basically where there has never been any problem of too little precipitation, we now have excess, and where there have been always historically droughts, they are now longer and more severe, and that is more or less robustly reproducible across different calculations. So, my feeling is that wealthy nations like the US or Australia um, are going to face terrible problems, already are facing, but will face even more. But those countries are wealthy enough and have the technological wherewithal such that they will do two things, and both of those are, in my opinion, unacceptable. First, all wealthy nations will do their utmost best to export the problem to the problems in plural to those who are least able to cope with them, essentially from the mid latitudes to the tropics. That's number one. Even domestically, the well-off will do their utmost successfully, I think, to export the problem to most vulnerable population within the US, for example, from the wealthy and well-to-do Northeast to the Deep South, where already things, many of those issues present themselves more in a more challenging way. So unfortunately, you can say very cruelly that the well-off will buy their way out of the real catastrophes, I should say, and those least capable of doing what it takes to avoid major catastrophes will be the ones bearing the brunt. I hate to say it, I wish I could say something else, but seems to be the reality.
I would note that on this panel here, we have two scientists and we have me. And I'm not a scientist. I'm a writer and self-styled researcher, and I'm less qualified than they are to estimate what will happen in 20 years or 30 years. But I'll note that the precautionary principle, I just scribbled down the definition here, if I could read my writing, where there are threats of serious irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. Well, we have to have a degree of humility. We don't know exactly what the state of the world will be if we keep functioning the way we're functioning now as a civilization in 20 or 30 years. But all indications point that things will just get worse. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes up every year. We have a terrible problem with methane in the atmosphere. And we have more and more ferocious storms. So the precautionary principle would tell us, if we can't know with certainty what's going to happen, let's do all cost-effective measures to try to mitigate the damage. And in the history of civilization, I can't think of a more cost-effective measure than eating beans instead of beef. So that's what I'm here to argue for, that we are risking all this damage to the planet in order to eat beef that's giving us heart attacks. So it's just, it's beyond foolish to used the planet this way, 40% of the non-ice land surface of the Earth and all of the oceans, which is 70% of the Earth, devoting them to eating animals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody wrote in the comments. I've been following the comments, and some of them are very interesting. Somebody sort of declared unilaterally the carbon tax is nothing but a redistribution of wealth. Not really. I mean, it's a nice pithy way to summarize the problem. It suffers from one limitation, and that is that it is incorrect. In other words, if we don't know because there is no carbon tax, but suppose we were to tax emissions, it would not be a wholesale transformation of wealth from one group to another. No, it will be a wholesale taxing of those who emit the most. And what can rationally be argued against slapping those who contribute the most to a particular problem with the highest price tag? That seems to be the most logical thing that a society can do to defend itself under the guise of the precautionary principle. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Steve, just to give a little bit of information on your question about what's going to happen in coming decades. The face of climate change right now, the human face, is in climate refugees. Now, since the turn of the century, we've had about 20 million climate refugees per year. Most of them are within their continent, most in Africa, in fact, sub-Saharan Africa. They have to move from where they are. But it comes back to your point, Professor Eshel, about the wealth of that society. The millennium drought in the Middle East led to the Syrians having to walk off their land. They had no social support system, and they had no rain, and they had no crops, nothing to feed their families. What do you do? Now, the hardest thing for people to do is to leave their home, to walk away from their home. That's probably the hardest thing to do on earth. And yet they did it. And that caused enormous strife when they tried to go to Europe just for food. So this is happening. 20 million a year. Last year it spiked. There were nearly 100 million. So that's the face of the future. And we can't say, oh, that's a third world problem, because we are so interlinked now. The climate refugees lead to conflict, no question about that. Conflict leads to armed conflict. In the Middle East, this was the Sunni and the Shiites coming together in the cities because they couldn't live on the land. And that all the conflict that caused. And, you know, it just goes on. So if we are to create a planet for ourselves and for future generations, I hate to think what our grandchildren will have to put up with. You know, the world is changing. Can we just blithely ignore it and go to the supermarket and still pretty much buy whatever we want? Or can we accept the fact, accept the responsibility that we are part of this world? We cannot say, not my problem anymore. We are part of this, and we do have a responsibility to future generations. I mean, oldies like me, we're almost done. We had it all. We had it all growing up in the 60s. Wow. You know, this world has been incredible. But now I realize that there are consequences. And so, you know, it's just a matter of us growing up. We've got to take responsibility for ourselves. And I think we will all do that, because I believe humans are slow but not stupid. So we will come to our senses, I'm sure.
just quickly, the obvious problem to all these things is someone is going to sell less of something if we make a change. And if you convince everyone to make a change in their diet, the people who sell the products that are no longer being eaten, the beef industry, the dairy industry, the fish industry, they're going to use their resources to try to stop that. And that seems to be why, so I don't know how to solve that, but how do you solve that if to make this happen, someone's got to go out of business? So what do you do about that?
I find it most unpersuasive. Before I became a scientist, I was a professional deep sea diver. I raised cattle in northern Israel. I spent years biking across the world. A person can do more than one thing, and well, okay? And if you no longer can sell product X, really? Can you not ever sell product Y? Is it just so different an art of selling X versus Y that you cannot, and you just throw your hands in the air and say, I am bereft because my livelihood is lost? No, we see perfectly well that those, let's say, among coal miners who are willing to take the additional training that is offered to them and then transition to, let's say, wind or solar industries, they do far better without the lung cancer than they did earlier. So I find it hard to believe that some people would like us to believe that they are so rigid and so incapable that they can only do one thing, and if that thing is no longer viable, they're lost. That's absurd.
Okay. So an unbelievable movie came out called Eating Our Way to Extinction. And it was, a incredible thing. All these facts came together. It was made with the highest quality and the best actors. It was an unbelievable moment. And I saw it and I thought, okay, it's out there now. And now everyone could see this. So, Gerard, what happened? What was the response? What did the politicians say? What did the scientists say? What did the public say? Do we need to make a part 2? I mean, you did it. We put all this together and you made the incredible movie. What was the result and what was the impact and what do we need to do next?
Yeah, it actually has had quite an impact. It's had 10 million views on all the different platforms now. And they've made just 2 months ago, they made a short 36-minute version of the essential facts. The first one was a beautiful, in my view, but way too long. And there are plans for the future. There's not the money there yet, but there are plans to produce more documentaries on parts of this, very short ones, and aimed at the level that we can get. So yes, I think it's part of the education process. I think the greatest part of the education process is us realizing that we've got to change. But the So Eating Away to Extinction is certainly ongoing. It's been translated into, I think, 16 different languages. We've got all sorts of celebrity endorsements and so on. And there've been releases as late last year in different language speaking audiences, in having a voiceover in that language by a celebrity in that language. So it's still going. It's definitely still going. But I think it's there's so many good, so much good information out there now that people can no longer ignore it. I think The Game Changers was a good documentary, and that they claim that was the most watched documentary ever. So I think the message is getting through.
Last year we had a speaker named Captain Paul Watson, and he said a very simple thing. He said, if the oceans die, we die. And, I guess between ocean acidification and the coral reefs dying and the overfishing, he was saying that we're doing great damage. So do you want to comment on that? What he was saying? Do you know what he meant when he said if the oceans die, we die? Do the oceans provide oxygen for us? And how are we killing the oceans? What are we doing to create this ocean acidification?
Well, perhaps I can start that answer. There are now 300 to 400 permanent ocean dead zones around the world. They're mostly out off estuaries, big rivers. The Gulf of Mexico is a classic. But now the open oceans are starting to lose oxygen as well. And it's been linked with previous mass extinctions that we have the oceans have been losing their oxygen. So this is very concerning to those who look at that. But we've been using the oceans as our dump, as our rubbish receptacle, and we've trashed the oceans. The world's continental shelves have been bottom trawled, and bottom trawling is incredibly destructive to those ecosystems. We've now, if you eat fish, you'll notice that every so often the fish that you used to eat no longer available. The reason for that, we've fished them out. So we move on to the next species. We go deeper in the ocean. We go further out away from shore. And as Professor Eshel said before, it costs more to get out there in fuel, etc. But in Australia, there's a species called orange ruffy, and that was the replacement for a few other species that were missing. So orange ruffy turns out to be a deep water fish that grows to more than 100 kilos, and it lives for more than 100 years. And guess what? We've done away with them too. So 90% or so of the large fish, the fish we eat, are now gone. So we've got to realize we've been trashing the oceans for so long that and polluting them. Look at all the plastic in the oceans now, the microplastics, the great garbage patches in the Pacific Ocean that just swirl around collecting more garbage, and ecosystems, it turns out. But we've got to change that. That the oceans have been. We can't. When the kid turns 8 and we give them a fishing rod for their birthday, how ridiculous is that? What are we saying to them? You used to be able to go out and fish and catch fish. You can't anymore. But what are we doing? This is ridiculous. We've got to change.
Just specifically on the subject of deforestation, we're told that forests and trees provide oxygen. So how exactly are we causing deforestation, biodiversity loss, and species extinction? And again, what is the specific concern about that? Is it the oxygen from the forest? And what is biodiversity loss or species extinction? How does that affect us? So those 3 things: deforestation, biodiversity loss, species extinction. How are we creating this with our diet, and what concerns you about it? Is it just the oxygen from the forest? Just could you elaborate?
Well, the grazing land that's on Earth, that's not how the Earth looked when we arrived on the scene. So we have deforested land all over the planet, and we're doing it currently in the Amazon and elsewhere, for the very purpose of raising animals, often ruminant animals. So right now we're chopping back the Amazon for the stupid purpose of growing soybeans to feed to cows, or for directly having cows graze on that land. It's hard to imagine anything more foolish than that. So you have biodiversity loss when the animals lose their habitat, and you have it when areas are fenced off to raise cattle or sheep, and then you have the ranchers kill the predators of the animals they're making money off. It's all part of the same web of foolishness of just devoting so much of the earth to eating animals that we shouldn't be eating in the first place because we're natural herbivores.
Yeah. Yeah, in the US, 47% of the entire lower 48 is devoted to food production. And of that, a little over half is related to just grazing, and that produces a cow can use an acre of rangeland for about 16, 17 days a year. All the rest, she and her calf have to go elsewhere and occupy a larger land, a larger land area. So it's incredibly absurd. And I made a calculation of how much I don't want to dominate the discussion, but by sharing again. But there is an incredible, somewhere between 1 and 2 orders of magnitude, just to be simple, a factor of 50 or so more food that you can get while rewilding half of that 47%, fully rewilding half of the 47. So that's like a quarter of the entire lower 48 that you completely give back to nature. And with the rest, you arrange agricultural land, not the way it is done now, which is very, very suboptimal, but in a way that is optimal in terms of both reducing emission and maximizing nutrient retention. And you can feed all the population with as much protein and far superior, nutritionally superior diet on about 10% of what you're using now. Instead of 47, 4.7. That is dramatic, and what the damage we do to biodiversity due to climate change, that we're not going to solve anytime soon. But at least we can give them back the real estate and hope that they use it in such a manner that they thrive. And some of them will not thrive, but most will. So that, I think, is the most reasonable to do. And for that, we will not be raising cattle the way, John Wayne depicted in the Westerns. Okay, that was then and now is now. We can't do it anymore. It's as simple as that. It's just like pants that you wore when you were 5 don't fit anymore. And nobody really thinks that that is so earth-shattering that you need to discuss it to death.
Okay, Stacy, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area of California. And thank you all so much for this excellent panel. My question, okay, so here in the States, climate change is very much a partisan issue. The industries that are responsible for the emissions that bring about climate change, anthropogenic climate change, animal agriculture being a primary culprit. These industries are massively investing in convincing the voting public to oppose good policies at the national level all the way down to the local level to curb these industries' destructive practices. So, and protecting industry from government regulation is a right-wing darling of an issue. And what we end up here in the States is followers of one party lining up behind the mantras that are chanted by the Republican leadership figures and digging in whenever they're presented with scientifically demonstrated facts about climate change and the actual causes of it. So how do each of you panel members approach this problem when facts and data and scientifically sound policy only trigger these groups to resist and to dig in even more rigidly? So how do you communicate when reasoned communication is exactly what they fight against?
Actually, that's a good point.
I'll try to take a stab at that. The reality is that today, for the most part, The politicians in the Democratic Party acknowledge anthropogenic climate change and say we must do something about it, and they focus on things like encouraging solar investment. And for the most part, the majority of the Republican Party leadership denies anthropogenic climate change. But, you know, I may prefer one side to the other, but the reality is we're not going to beat this problem with more solar investment. And the Democrats do not address the problem of animal agriculture and land use. So really, you have both parties that are really ignoring the problem. President Biden passed a bill that has a tremendous amount of investment in green energy, clean energy, I should say. But it's, I think it's doomed to fail as a strategy if we're not changing our food systems. So I think neither party has much to be proud of here. And so I put my energies into trying to get people to change the way they eat. And if the population would change the foods they buy, the people can lead the politicians, because I don't see the politicians taking the lead here.
Yeah. Today, the Supreme Court of Switzerland found in favor of plaintiffs that sued the government for essentially infringing on their right to a healthy life by failing to contribute to climate change mitigation. Now, think about the way society addressed smoking 30, 40 years ago, and the way it is now. Ultimately, charlatans like Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley can, wave their arms all they want, but ultimately reality has a funny way of catching up even to the people living in Texas. You're not immune from reality simply because your address is Texas. So they will realize that, that people like the senators I just mentioned, they're just simple charlatans that have nothing good to offer, nothing productive to offer. And I think that reality will take care of the problem. Hopefully, we'll get rid of those charlatans and replace them with somebody who actually can do something productive. But even if not, even if it's the same old pseudo leaders, they will be forced to change their tunes. Whether it's going to be fast enough, that I'm not promising anything. I fear that it may not. But they are doomed. They have nothing but last year's ice to sell, and it's melting.
Dominique, would you like to ask a question? And where are you from?
Hi, my name is Dominique. So I'm in French-speaking Canada, so Quebec. And earlier today, we had a presentation from Paul Shapiro, the CEO of BetterMeat.co, which makes meat-like products using fungi and mycelium. And it's a really fascinating industry. And I believe that as many examples were explained, things change when a better technology appears, because the number of non-vegans is a lot bigger than us little group of vegans, and we want people to change their eating habits. But I think that meat is such a important food in culture and everything that we all know, that the only way, I think, I believe that is going to change is going to be if a better technology comes, if it's the same taste, if it's cheaper, if it's easier. So what do you guys think about fungi-based meat products?
I'm all in favor of it. And I want to make a distinction between that and what you sometimes hear about, which is called lab meat, which I think is a fantasy. But meat made, anything you want to call a meat patty, whether it's made from sweet potatoes and nuts or whether it's made from fungi, I'm all in favor of it. And that is real. And I haven't tasted Paul Shapiro's meat yet. It's not widely on the market, but I'm rooting for it. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be very healthy.
Yeah, yeah. I think that you will be surprised. I share your view about the singular importance of beef and meat in general in culinary in various cuisines. At the same time, when I grew up in Israel, there are two populations. There's the Palestinians and the Israelis, and they're basically indistinguishable people. But only the Palestinians would buy my beef when I was raising cattle. Why? Because back then, the Palestinians were significantly better off on average than Israelis. Of course, now it's exactly reversed, but back then it was the case. So two identical people in every respect, one eating routinely beef, the other basically not eating at all. Why? Because of cost. I would like to believe that what happens in Israel and Palestine is not that unique or distinct from what can happen elsewhere. If it costs the consumer what it costs society, the consumption will drop dramatically.
Okay. Could each of you sum up your final thoughts that you want to leave us with? Glenn, why don't you go first, then Gidon, and then Gerard?
Well, the thought that I would like to emphasize is that we are raping the earth, overfishing the oceans and bottom trawling the oceans and destroying phytoplankton populations that produce oxygen and sequester carbon dioxide. We're overgrazing the earth, and we are destroying forests and eliminating biodiversity, all for the purpose of eating food that isn't even our food. We are natural herbivores. And so the insanity of doing that, the insanity of creating all this damage in order to have heart attacks and to be the most obese population on earth and to have an epidemic of type 2 diabetes from our fatty Western diet is just, it's all patently insane and unnecessary. So we have to, it doesn't matter what avenue you look at it from the avenue of health, sustainability, concern for the animals, concern for the climate, it all comes to the same conclusion. Eat human food. Human food is whole grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, fungi, nuts and seeds. That's human food. I've been eating it practically all my life now. I grew up eating McDonald's, but became a vegetarian at 17. And I'm in excellent health, and I recommend it to everyone. Just eat human food, and that's our only hope to reverse climate change.
Thank you.
I think we should definitely let people do whatever the heck people want, so long that they pay their way. If you want to contribute 5 times more than you need to emissions, or 10 times more to loading dead zones with more reactive nitrogen, sure, be my guest. You want type 2 diabetes? Enjoy dialysis. By all means, you want to do it? Do it. Just pay for it. And pay for it both in the real environmental cost and the real cost of caring for you once you develop all those degenerative diseases. We should not abandon anybody, but we should definitely strive for an economic system that does penalize ostentatious use of resources and that rewards more judicious use. That, I think, will go a really long way toward not solving our problem, but making it significantly more tractable.
Thank you. Gerard?
Yeah, final comments. I think that we need to stop hiding behind partisan issues. We need to stop blaming the other. We need to, each of us, start thinking for ourselves. I mean, you know, there'll be all the processes. There'll be if we include the real cost of meat, it'll go up dramatically. Politicians aren't the problem. They just follow the people. So if the people change their mind, then the politicians will change their policies. So each one of us, if we want a habitable planet for our grandchildren, we need to start thinking. We need to stop hiding behind partisan beliefs. We need to start looking at the world as, okay, well, if I'm in a supermarket, that beautifully wrapped plastic beef cut, should I get that? What is the outcome of me buying that thing? We need to start thinking for ourselves. The information's out there. It'll be coming through more and more and more. But it's like smoking. You rarely see smokers these days. And in the future, it'll be the same as eating meat. You'll have to go to Chinatown to get a steak. So the planet cannot support that. You know, and you'll feel it, well, you'll feel it most in the extreme weather, and the extremes are both hot and cold. The polar vortex is slowing down, so we're going to get hot and cold now. The weather systems are not being separated the way they used to be, so we're seeing more variability. So, as I said before, we humans are slow but not stupid. And I think that we will start to think for ourselves and get with the program and keep the world for our children. Simple as that.
Thank you very much. Glenn, how do we stay in touch with you, follow up with your work and your books?
I have a website, glenmerzer.com. People could contact me through that. My book on this subject is Food is Climate. I have my two other recent books are Own Your Health and America Goes Vegan.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. And Gidon, how about you? How do we stay in touch or follow up with you?
Oh, you just Google my name, you will find my email. It's not a secret. And yeah, that's one of them. I don't really spend that much time on LinkedIn, but yeah, I mean, I have academic websites. You can find me.
Thank you. And Gerard, how about yourself?
Yeah, Eating Our Way to Extinction is available for free on YouTube, and there's been a recently released 36-minute version also available for free on YouTube. So you can find out all about it there.
Okay, there's the movie.
That's the one.
When did the movie come out?
The 36-minute version is out now. So you can watch it in the 1 hour 22 or the 36-minute version. And it's a pretty powerful. They use celebrity quite effectively. They got Kate Winslet doing the narration. She's got a beautiful voice. but all the facts are there. So yeah, just YouTube, Google it.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all so much. I'd like to unmute the audience so they could also thank you. We really all appreciate you guys spending so much time learning this and sharing this critical information with us.
Thank you very much.
you.
That was
Thank
excellent.
Thank you
For all your work and
presentation. Thank you, Glenn. Yay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Glenn has a podcast.